Sit with Lexi B.
What's up, family? My name is Lexi B, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Sit with Lexi B Season 3. Before I get into our next guest, we need to discuss just a couple of action items. Make sure to follow us on all platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn. The links are right there for you, as well as make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where we are showcasing all of our content moving forward. This guest, our Season 3 premiere guest, is the iconic, the queen, the auntie, forever auntie of every American kid. It is Mrs. Natalie Daise. And for folks who do not recognize that term, I'm going to just show a picture right here. Natalie Daise is Auntie Natalie because she and her husband were the phenomenal partnership of the award-winning Nickelodeon show, Gullah Gullah Island. So let's take it back for folks who don't know. In the 1990s, Nickelodeon was the premier place for any kid in America. It was probably one of the first, if not the first, cable place where kids could go and get all kid content. Nickelodeon was anti-adult. It was all for kids. And so they had all of these shows. And one of the most amazing shows, at least for me and my friends, was Gullah Gullah Island. Gullah Gullah Island was the show that not only showcased information, lessons, values about how to be a good person, but really showcased the talent and the beauty of the Gullah Geechee people in the Carolinas in the United States. And if you don't know who that is, Google it. But it's a group of people and they're bomb. Or just watch episodes of Gullah Gullah Island. The point is that we grew up on this show through dance, through music, through puppetry. Natalie and her husband, Ron, along with their 2 kids, had an episode each week showcasing and dedicating their culture around their people, but also giving real life lessons on what does it look like to be in community and just to be kind together. This is why Natalie became really known as Auntie Natalie. We all knew her. We all felt like we were part of this family on Gullah Island. More importantly, for children that looked like me as a dark-skinned Black girl growing up in St. Louis, it was very impactful and important to watch Natalie and her family every single week because it represented something that mainstream media was not doing. Stay tuned and listen as Auntie Natalie and I discuss the representation of storytelling and why, especially today, it is important for all people to be seen, valued, heard, and their stories be told on multiple platforms.
Sit with Lexi B podcast.
Miss Natalie, how are you?
I am so good.
So for people who don't know who you are, and I will allow you to tell them who you are, but first I want to tell them who I know you as. You are the TV auntie for the 90s Black kid generation. You and your husband and your family, like these people that you created, started a show called Gullah Gullah Island that was syndicated on Nickelodeon. And for folks who don't know, in the 90s, Nickelodeon was the premier place for kids television. There were other places where kids could watch TV, but you would come home and you'd put on Nickelodeon. That's where all the things were. And so as a kid growing up in the United States, if you weren't watching Nickelodeon, you weren't able to socialize on the playground. Okay, all the shows were there. And your family was this phenomenal show called Gullah Gullah Island, which just talked about all these adventures that you do with your kids, and also teaching us life lessons. But most importantly, it was a Black family on Nickelodeon. And to my knowledge, I think it was the only TV show that showed a Black family on Nickelodeon at that time. And so for me as a kid growing up in the 90s, it was your family that I really thought was my family. Like, I thought Auntie Natalie was my aunt. And we were talking about the Gullah Gullah Geechee people. And as a Black American kid who did not know about the Gullah Gullah Geechee people, you were the first person who told me about this subculture within the Black diaspora culture. in the United States. But yeah.
It was happenstance. It was grace. It was grace.
So before we get started, I have to ask you the two important questions. Is one, what's in your coffee cup? What are you drinking with me as we have this discussion about the power of representation?
Today, I'm actually drinking sparkling water, unflavored. I've been drinking a whole lot of water. I'm in South Carolina. You got to stay hydrated.
Where are your people from?
Well, first generation up. I was born in central New York, but that's not where my people were from. My people were from the southern states of the United States. My daddy was born in Alabama. My mama was born in Virginia. My daddy's people were probably born in Alabama. And my mama's people, well, between Connecticut and North Carolina. But we were like, they were like southern expats up in the north, you know. So I grew up in the north, but I grew up southern. Because all my people, every black person I knew had come up. Their families had come up from the south. And we were the first generation born in the north. So those are my people. My people are Shirley Louise, who taught me how to sing harmony before I could read, and taught me how to speak publicly so that I would not shame her when I had my piece at church.
Amen.
And Buddy, his name was William, but everybody called him Buddy, who bought me my very first art set, November 11th, 1973, and I am a professional artist. So I owe them for both being a storyteller and an artist.
So then how did you go from New York and how did you get to the Carolinas with the Gullah Gullah Geechee people?
A deep sigh. A couple of things, and I tell this story differently, so I'm feeling my way how I'm gonna tell the story. The easiest way is they're all true. Is that my grandmother, my daddy's mama, was living here in South Carolina down in the Gullah Geechee community because my daddy's sister married a man from St. Helena Island, which is right in the middle of the community. So, you know, they were here and my cousins, and then grandma took ill. And she was very ill. And so the family got together and decided that I would come and take care of her. They did not ask me if that was my plan. They told me that that's what I would do. They bought me a Greyhound bus ticket one way, which was like a message, and sent you down south. Sent me down south. And I really honestly, part of me was thinking, if it was so great, why y'all leave? But grandma was here and auntie was here. And so I came, and it really kind of saved my life. It did. It did. I was, it was fortuitous. I was leaving a bad situation, though I had not intended to do that by getting on the Greyhound bus coming to South Carolina.
Right.
But what a wonderful blessing, because it was here that I found myself and I found my voice and I grew up.
I love it. So take me back, and as a person who does not know how TV is made, right? I can only imagine, you know, some TV producers like, let's make a show about Gullah Geechee people. I don't know. And let's find this family to do this with us who would be interested in doing this. But I get the impression from you that you knew from a very young age the power of representation, whether it's on film, on TV, whether it's in books. And so take me back to that moment when you and your partner and your kids are sitting in your living room thinking about this TV show that could become so big.
Did not happen like that. It was another grace situation. So my husband, when I met Ron, when I came down here way back in 1983, I met this, to me, he was just so beautiful, and he had the most gorgeous singing voice, and he was writing a book. And the book was called Reminiscences of a Sea Island Heritage. He was writing a book about the people of this community, oral histories, and old songs. He was tracing it all the way back. And after he wrote the book, you know, he'd be doing book signings, and folk would say, sing a song from the book, tell a story from the book. And he and I had been singing together from the time we met. We were like singing at church. And one day he was doing this. I said, you know what? We could be like Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis. Now, you may not know who they are. But
I know exactly who they are.
Okay.
Don't blame me, Natalie. I know exactly.
All right, Lexi. So, and he said, and then the next thing I know, he had taken his book and turned it into a script. He said, you tell this story and then we'll sing these songs. And nobody asked us to do it. There was no place to perform it for. But my husband, we call him Stay Ready So You Don't Have to Get Ready Days. And so he did this. And then out of the blue, we get a call from the director of the Penn Center, which was, it's a cultural center that was the first school for freedmen in the South. And now it's a cultural center on St. Helena. And he said, I've got these museum directors here. They're doing a conference. Y'all got anything you can do to entertainment Thursday night? And we were like, yeah. Okay. So we went and we read the stories and we sang the songs, and they stood up and they started clapping. And we were like, oh. And soon they began to invite us. And soon that's what we were doing full time. We were traveling around doing stories and songs of the Gullah Geechee people. We were doing it in museums and colleges and school cafeterias and, festivals. We were just doing that. So, and with my first baby, Sarah McKeeva, she was just a road baby. Pack her up and get on the road. So then I'm pregnant again with my second child. And I said, Ron, I cannot stand in another school cafeteria with two babies. I don't know what's next. Something else. And so we went and talked to our elders, and they're like, well, y'all had enough fun. Y'all need to get some real jobs and settle down. We were like, no, that's not it. And then one day, the author Gloria Naylor, known for Women of Brewster Place from Mama Daise, she had bought a house on St. Helena Island, and we had become friends. And she said her book at that time, Mama Day, was being optioned for a movie. She was bringing down the director and producer just to do some site location stuff. And she had bought a house, but it was empty, no furniture. And she said, Natalie, can you get some beds and stuff in there before I come down? I'm like, cool, I got you. I'm going to go to Salvation Army, whatever, and put some furniture in your house. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. And before they left, they invited us to dinner. Now, I am very pregnant as my husband. We're out at a friend of hers' house out on the island, way back in the island with the bugs. And she's there with her producer. Her name is Maria Perez, and the director, who was Lawrence Fishburne. And we're sitting there eating cold chicken out of a bucket. And we were starting to talk, I'm pregnant, I've got a kid. We started talking about TV because her friend who was producing it had been pitching shows to Nick, and none of them had gotten picked up.
Right.
And she said, maybe we could do a show about an island, because we were on an island. And Gloria says that you guys, maybe we can do a show about you. And that's how it happened. We were just sitting there eating cold chicken. And the answer to the prayer for what's next. So she went back to New York and told her partner, and then they're like, can you fly up to New York? And I was like, I am 8.5 months pregnant. No. So, and we weren't sweating this. We were just like, no. So what they did was she and her partners flew down to Charleston, rented a car, hired a local guy, and followed us around for a day with a camera, took it back to New York, and showed it to the folk at Nickelodeon. And then when Simeon was 5 weeks old, we flew up to meet with these Nickelodeon people and to talk about our life. And I remember I brought my son, and, in the Gullah Geechee culture, you don't be bringing babies out the house before they're 6 weeks old. What's wrong with you? But he was 5 weeks old. I'm like, y'all, just give me a pass. And so we flew up, and I remember one of the execs, probably wearing a suit that cost more than my car, asked to hold the baby, and he threw up all over the front of her seat. And we were like, well, this was a nice trip.
Yes.
But before the end of the day, we had a TV show. That quick, we were on the air within a year, which doesn't happen. And what they did, and I love it, the head writer, who's still a good dear friend, he said he came and he hung out with us for a week in South Carolina. I'm just going to hang out with y'all. He said, you just be yourself, and we'll work with that. So we just got to be ourselves. And it was our community. We introduced everybody. This is our community. This is our town. This is our beach. This is our family. And I was nursing my son, so yeah, he had to be on the show. Yeah. I had a 3.5-year-old daughter. Yeah, she had to be on the show.
I mean, she had nothing else to do, so come through, Sarah. Come through. So that's how that happened. And they were so wonderful because they would just say, tell us what you sing. Because we were singing in the house all the time. We were telling stories all the time. That's who we were. And they were really respectful to the culture and to the family. I remember, so I did my undergrad at Stanford, and I had this class. I forgot what it was called, but it was like one of those 200-person university classes, right? Mm-hmm. And it was for everybody in my year, so we're all the same age. And we had a lecture on Gullah Geechee people. And I distinctly remember I'm a sophomore in school, and this white teacher is talking about the Gullah Geechee people. And she gets up there and she says, has anyone heard of the Gullah Geechee people? And our whole class started singing the Gullah Gullah Island theme song.
Come and let's play together in the bright sunny weather.
Let's all go to Gullah Gullah Island. Gullah Gullah. Gullah Gullah.
And this class is diverse, but imagine 200 19, 20-year-olds. When someone says, what do you know about the Carolinas and the Gullah Geechee people? And all of us, because we're the same age and because Nickelodeon at that time was law in film, we just start singing this song. And I remember the teacher, who was in her probably late 50s, early 60s, she laughed and she just listened to us sing your whole theme song. And then it said, somebody want to explain this to me? And someone stood up and said, I don't know much, but Natalie and Ron taught me. And we ended up changing her whole 1.5 hour lecture and just talking about what we learned about the people through your show. It was hilarious.
It's the coolest story. I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that story.
Yes. It was phenomenal. And that's when I started understanding the impact of representation. Yeah. Because regardless of what you look like, when you see a minority on film or in stories, and I use the word minority basically to say when you see characters, people, real life people, whether it's real or fake, but people that are not from the majority power play book, it definitely changes you and it definitely brings this new perspective. So tell me about, why was it so important for you to be so authentic on screen for these millions and millions of Nickelodeon kids who you knew had never seen this before?
Let me tell you, Lexi, it was actually much closer to home for me. I wanted to do a show for my children. My children were watching TV, and there weren't anybody who looked like them. And very few. It's like, there was Maya the bee, and that poor little bee needed, I don't know, Prozac. And then there were the Smurfs, and they were blue.
Yep.
There was Barney, which, after a while, it's just like you want to watch TV with your children, but it's like, oh my God. We wanted to create TV for our children. That's what, we weren't thinking about the millions and millions of children. We were thinking about our children. We were thinking about the kids in our neighborhood. Let's do a show for them. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that our family got so big, that was wonderful. But I have to tell you that if in the beginning, I remember the first time the director, the exec CEO of Nick said, so many millions of people watch this. And I said, shh, don't tell me that. Don't tell me that. Because when I look through the window, I'm looking at one kid. Yeah. I'm looking at one kid. And I can talk to that child. But if you say, talk to 1 million children, I'll be like, what?
Yeah. But kids.
A lot of kids, but oh my goodness, there were, we didn't even know the impact, but there were some things that began to happen. I think it was maybe the second year I was in a supermarket, just sweaty, just trying to buy something. And I saw this little boy come in. He looked like he might be Latinx, and he was with an older white man. I see them and, they glance at me. I'm not really thinking about them. And I'm getting ready to check out when this gentleman, he comes up to me, this older dude, gray hair. He said, I don't know who you are, but you make my son very happy. And he gave me a flower and a $5 bill. And I'm still like, I can have these millions of kids, which is wonderful. And I remember this one time, this white woman was talking to me, and she was talking about her daughter. And her daughter, she said, I keep telling my daughter her hair is pretty, but she wants it to look like yours. I know. I mean, when the little brown girls certainly were growing up thinking they had to be able to toss it, that our hair, our kinky hair, our braided hair wasn't pretty. And here was this little girl who wanted hair like mine. And her mama is having the conversation a zillion black mamas have had with their children. Oh, honey, your hair is pretty. Oh, honey, your skin is pretty. It is. But this was like the world saw that we were beautiful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that was just amazing to me. And I was like, oh. That's when we started realizing what we were doing, because we didn't know. We did that first season, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then we thought, well, we don't know what's going to happen with this. We're going to go back. I guess we'll be back on the road again, you know. And then, you know, you'd be in the mall, and people would be like, Uncle Ron! And you're like, who's that kid?
Are we actually related? Like,
and it would see like depending on the parents' race or the gender, like fathers who'd be like, why is my kid running up to this man, these people, this man? The mothers would sometimes know, you know, like, oh, that's Uncle Ron. And so that was really wonderful. We were in Ghana recently, and it was like, oh, the Gullah people. And it was just the most, yeah, certainly representation matters. What it meant, and we learned more when we heard your peers tell us how important it was to see themselves. But we would have those experiences where, you know, folk would come up and be so connected. And it's like, oh, look what we're doing. Look what we're doing. And all we started out with was, how do we make something that we want our kids to see? That we want our beautiful brown children to watch, you know? Who grew up in a house full of black art and books and music. And how do we create a kind of show so that other children and our children can watch that? That was it. You know, you start out with that small desires, and it's not a small desire, with that passion and that desire to do that thing. And then it was like, it just got so big.
I'm not going to lie to you. Now that I'm an adult and I sit and really think about your show and just how authentic it was in the 90s, right? And I don't care what people say about America and our progress, and I put that in quotes, but I remember in the 90s, it was Gullah Gullah Island and Reading Rainbow. And to be very honest, Reading Rainbow to me wasn't really a black show, but it had LeVar, who is the black godfather of all time. Hello, Uncle LeVar. And so his representation on film, or on TV on Reading Rainbow, was huge. Yeah. But the show wasn't about just black culture. It was about books and learning and reading and honestly cultures all around the world. And it was Uncle LeVar, you know, narrating through that. How was it with your show going to TV executives and being this authentic? Or was it something they wanted? Because if that's something they wanted and they never pushed back, that is very surprising and amazing to me.
There was very little pushback because the show was us. So this wasn't a show that was created and then they cast it.
Right.
They brought us and then they created a show. And as the head writer said, you be you. Now, we had a few things, you know, but they agreed. And it helps that Maria Perez is Hispanic. She's from Puerto Rico. So that was helpful. And also, our head writer, Frack as well, Hyman, is a black man. And so they really tried to keep like the hire that way. And they were actually pretty respectful of our desires to be authentic and to do some research and to really honor Gullah culture. Because it's not like they just did central casting and pulled in a couple of people.
Right.
So it was us. So we were, we got to talk about the music. We got to talk about, our community. So every episode that was filmed, we filmed right here down in the Low Country. So everything you saw outside was here. And that gave it that authenticity. And I remember the only time there was ever any little pushback was initially when they were like, they'd get the scripts and they say, so then the child says, Natalie. And I was like, oh, no. No. You got to put a handle on that. We are friends. I'm their auntie. I'm their mama. I'm not their peer, but I'm friendly. We have a wonderful, warm relationship. But and they were like, no, that's just so old fashioned. That's so Southern. We're like, oh, let's just listen. Yeah. You don't come down here in the Gullah community and have a 7-year-old not put a handle on your name. And that was the only push we had. And of course, we won. Because
I was like, I missed that episode.
Oh, there were no episodes like that. Listen, as old as I am, when I encounter someone who is my elder, I put a handle on it. I just can't.
Oh, of course.
I do.
Of course. Of course. I'm not going to get in trouble with the ancestors or my mother, who is thankfully living and healthy, by not putting a handle on an elder's name.
Unless they invite you to. That was just how I...
And I've never had a Black Southern elder invite me. And honestly, if they invited me, I still wouldn't do it because I think it's a trick.
Yes, you try to fool me.
Yeah.
But no, they were so open to it. It was a really excellent experience. And all of the producers, all of the directors would come down here. And they let us inform the shape of the show.
I love that for you. And I love that selfishly for me and all the kids who grew up in my era. My next question to you is, you had this phenomenal show that showed all this authenticity and this representation that you had this huge studio honor, right? If anything, invite and say, we want you to be your biggest, best self, whatever that looks like. And now it's 2024. And
yeah.
We have the news, we have the TV, we have the TV shows, we have banned books. I'll be frank with you, never in my life did I think that Judy Blume would be banned from a local library. What do you think about this? Because when I think of your show in, 93, 94, 95, I'm a little girl looking at the TV and saying, progress is being made. And now it's 2024, and I'm a grown woman now with a kid, and I look at the TV, or, I'm reading the news and learning that children's books are being banned, and people do not like certain TV shows, and money is being decreased in diverse TV shows, television, and film. What does that mean to you as a storyteller who told representative stories on TV?
I find it heartbreaking. And I often think of where do we go and how do we continue to tell, which I will do with my dying breath, which won't be hopefully for many, many, many more years.
Yeah.
It's actually amazing to me, having grown up in the 60s, where I was encountering a lot of, at that time, overt racism, but with the belief, I remember when King was murdered, with the belief that we were moving on this thing and that my children would be living in a different world.
Yeah.
And so for my millennial children to be facing this is beyond comprehension. In South Carolina, they just removed African-American AP studies from all the high schools because our state education director says, there's no room for politics in the high school. I'm getting ready to write her a letter like, this isn't politics, darling. South Carolina was a Black state. It's still almost a 50% Black state. This isn't politics. So I have to balance my, and to be honest, my rage with my quest for what is the best thing for me to do now. What can we do now? And of course, I think we use every platform available to tell stories. authentic stories in whatever media we can. Or the banned books things really it's really kind of a conundrum to me, because I had just been in a meeting with some folk last year where I was like, I want to create this book for kids, and I'm like, kids don't read. I don't have a book, they don't read. I was like, so why y'all banning the books? You say you don't think they read them anyway. Why don't you just leave the books there?
Right.
Now you're bringing all attention to the book, so thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, so Judy Blume and the African American Studies being pulled out of the AP program is just, this just happened. This,
Which is very interesting, because one would argue that African American history is American history.
it is American history.
Yes.
And how in the world can you talk about South Carolina without talking about it?
Without talking about Black Americans.
You can't.
You can't.
Unless you do the whole revisionist, well, I'm preparing my letter.
I hope so.
I have a TED Talk scheduled for this year, and I've been working with a coach. I am the only person of color who's speaking at this particular TED Talk on Hilton Head. And I was talking to the coach about my statement, my talk, and she's like, "Well, so point number 4, does that really go?" And I'm talking about representation in art and visual art, and what happens when we see ourselves. And one of the stories I talked about is I was working in a gallery, and a white woman walked in and she said, I just got married and I have a new house. I'm looking for paintings of Black women working. And there is this, sort of genre of art where we're always, washing clothes. And you'll see it a lot in southern spaces where, we're washing clothes, we're hanging, and I was...
Yeah.
I mean, she blatantly, it's not like they buy it by accident, That's what
no,
she was looking for.
they buy it because it makes them feel good.
Right. Whereas, my
Right here, it's never boring.
Right. My work is very different. And I will never paint labor just because of that. And not that I honor the labor. But I always like to paint us in our most exalted form.
Amen.
Which might not be for that woman's house, obviously, because if you bring my art into your home, you have brought in a sacred piece with a lot of energy. So that might not be what you need. But that point was making my coach uncomfortable. And I said, well, if it doesn't serve the talk, then of course I'll take it out. But if it's just that it makes you uncomfortable, that's not a good enough reason for me to move that.
I would argue maybe you should stay if it makes you uncomfortable, because the discomfort is where we grow. The discomfort's where we grow, right? You don't grow in comfort. In comfort, you just stay in comfort. But the discomfort is where,
Right. So I told her, I don't, your discomfort is not a good enough reason for me to take this out of this thing. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about it. I don't know what will happen. I think as long as we have access at this point, we still have access to platforms like this, to social media platforms. We don't know how long we've got access, but we do. And we should take advantage of it. My son is an actor, but what he's learning is, as a Black man, can't tell you how many times I have seen my son killed on the screen.
Yeah.
He's like, if I want to be in a certain kind of story, I must create that story.
Yes.
I have to write that story. I have to find a way to film and record that story. Because I cannot count, as I said, you can't count on the other folk to tell who you are.
Right.
So I am grateful that we had that it was Maria Perez who I first met, and her partner Kathy Minton and Kit Laborn, who said to us, "Be yourselves, and we'll work with you. We will work around who you are." I'm so grateful because it didn't have to happen like that.
But it didn't, and I would argue, and again, you know more about this than I do. I've never been on syndicated television, but I would argue the number of times the conversation around different cultures on TV behind the scenes and how it didn't go that way.
Yeah. We were, see, I say it was grace all the time. It was grace. We knew there was something else. I knew it was time for something else. We didn't know what it was, and grace, it showed up. It showed up at our door. You know, we didn't have an agent. We didn't have a manager when we went out there saying, boy, we should be on TV. We just knew that the stories that we had been telling for years, traveling around in our van around the country, that they needed to move somewhere else. And that way opened up, and there we were.
For folks who are listening who don't know, can you give us a little bit, very high level cliff note of who are the Gullah Geechee people in the Carolinas and why are they so exquisite?
Why are they so exquisite? I love that. Cliff notes, Gullah Geechee people, at one point, the major crop that made this country wealthy was rice.
Yep.
And most folk don't know that. They think everybody was here working in cotton fields. But along the coast, from like southern North Carolina to northern Florida coast, it was rice country. And so, you know, these Europeans did not know how to grow rice. And they very specifically went to West Africa and to the rice coast to bring back rice producers. And this whole area was largely, like Georgetown County, where I live, was 90% African. They worked the rice fields throughout this region. This was the largest rice exporter in the world.
Yeah.
For hundreds and hundreds of years of hand labor, of turning cypress swamps into rice fields by hand. And so what you had was like an exportation of Africa here. And so there was very much the speech itself has a lot of Africanisms in it. It's a Creole language, much like you'll hear in the Caribbean. Same thing, you always say, just got off at a different port. So this Creole language that started as a trade language on the coast of West Africa and continued and became the first language of those Africans who were born on these islands and on this coast. And so they maintained much of their African culture on the coast, in these coastal regions. And some of it traveled, you know, throughout the country as people move. So sometimes you'll hear even things that we called ebonics.
Yeah.
You know, the hard D for the hard TH. Have somebody say, I went across the street instead of the street. Those are actually Africanisms that just sort of moved as we began to scatter. But that is who we are. So the language is unique still. It's there are deeper Gullah speakers. There are Gullah speakers who you always say, what did you say? And it still exists. The language still exists. And now what I love is that younger Gullah speakers will not code switch. And I love that because, you know, you were trained, well, you know, it's very good that you made a lot. It used to be teachers would come down and try to send all the children to speech therapists.
Right. Because they thought that we didn't know how to speak correctly. Right.
Yes. It's like you have to understand the language.
Yes.
So I just know young people who won't code switch and who are embracing it and embracing the practices that, you know, had been tried to educate out of them. They tried to smash it out so that we could become part of the melting pot, which is really just an illusion, of course. Right. And so that's the teapot, teaspoon.
I know, because we haven't talked about the food, and this is the wrong platform for that, but I do want to honor Gullah food, y'all, is a different level, and it is not soul food. As a non-Gullah who is born and bred and raised on collard greens and cornbread and soul food, Gullah food is not that. And it is fantastic.
Now you may see cornbread and collard greens. Yes, of course.
You will. But Gullah food is different. It's different. And so good. So everybody should go to the Carolinas and respectfully honor the Gullah people and try some food.
Yeah. And try some food. And try if you can. Unfortunately, they're disappearing. But there are still restaurants and eateries that are run by Gullah people. And there are chefs who are preparing that food. And it's not all just been sort of colonized into, you know, the high-end restaurant where you get shrimp and grits and pay $50 for it. There are still folk who are making it from the tradition and the culture.
Mm-hmm. So now you as an artist who's been through such an incredible journey in her artistry lifetime and her professional lifetime as a storyteller, What do you want for the next generation of storytellers? What do you want from them?
I want the same thing that I was able to have. I want them to have their authentic voice. I want them to be unafraid to use it. I want them to tell their stories in whatever form, whatever mode best suits them and their voice, whether that be oral telling, as I'm a traditional teller, whether that be film or music or art or sciences. I want them to authentically express their experiences here. That to know that to be yourself is the best thing you can be. I was talking to someone recently about the myth of objectivity. You know, when I was in grad school, it's like, well, you have to be objective. It's like, it's impossible. By asking the question, I've put myself in it.
Of course.
And so that you don't have to step back as though you are not in your own life. It is your life. It is your story. Own it and tell it in whatever manner you can.
And also, and I'm thinking about this out loud. I've never thought about objectivity in that light before. I don't want you to be objective, because I do want your story.
Yeah.
Because what's the purpose of having a conversation with someone who refuses to tell their story or tell parts of their story in their authenticity? Yeah.
You have to be in it.
Yeah.
You have to be in it. So that's what I want. Tell your story, be as authentic as possible. Don't let anyone tell you that you should not be in your story. Who else is going to be in your story but you? So that's what I would say. And I love when I'm seeing like you and your peers doing that. And so I think as an elder now, my job is to say to you and to support you in whatever ways I can. That's my job. Say, yes, tell your story, daughter. Tell your story, niece. Tell your story, child. Tell your story. And whatever I can do to support you in telling your story, I will do so, because I have been blessed to get to this point. And that's my job.
I love that. My last question for you that we are asking every guest new this season is, if you had to reintroduce yourself after this conversation, who are you? So if I said, Auntie Natalie, who are you? And you responded with, I am. How would you end that?
I am the tremendously blessed creative catalyst and storyteller who has birthed amazing children, both of my body and of my soul. And I'm just so grateful to be here.
Well, I am just a little fan from St. Louis, Missouri, who cannot say enough how grateful I am to have Uncle Ron and Auntie Natalie on TV telling me every day that I can be my most authentic self through your words, through, fill up the frog, shout out to whoever was in that suit and their quads. I'm sure it was a lot. But even small things. It was your daughter dressing on camera, that when I went to my all-white private school in color and with beads in my hair, and I'd be made fun of, that I would think, but Sarah also wears this. And that happened a lot with me and a lot of Black girls that I knew in St. Louis who went to predominantly white schools. It was like, this sucks. And then we'd see Sarah on Nickelodeon and we'd be like, but it's okay. So for all of those things, big and small, I thank you. And it's just an honor and a joy to be able to give you the flowers that you deserve in real time. And my parents thank you as well. I told them that I was talking to you, and my dad was like, please tell her that she is just a jewel.
Thank you. I thank you, Daddy.
My parents also wanted to let my child. Yes. My parents were like, it's okay. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this.
Me as well. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
Okay.